The Anglo-Scottish border is a particular kind of country. It is not the country of romantic Highland Scotland, with its grand mountains and its wild lochs, and its history polished by tourism into something that can be consumed comfortably. It is not the English pastoral, the rolling farmland and the cathedral towns, and the thatched villages that have been depicted so many times that they have taken on the quality of a comfortable idea of England, rather than a place with its own difficult history. The border is something else entirely. It is a country that exists in the space between two national identities and belongs completely to neither. A strip of moorland and river valley and upland grazing that was, for several centuries, among the most violent pieces of land in northern Europe, the territory of the border reivers, the raiding families of both kingdoms who rode against each other and against everyone else in a culture of violence so complete and so prolonged that it shaped the landscape, the architecture, the language, the people, and, as is the way with very old and very persistent violence, the folklore. The peel towers are the architecture of the border. They stand in the moorland and the river valleys in various states of preservation, from the structurally intact to the grass-grown heap, and they were built from the 12th century onward for a single purpose, which was to keep people alive in a landscape where other people were trying to kill them on a reliable basis. They are not elegant. They are not the castles of romance and pageantry. They are rubble-built defensive structures, typically 3 stories of rough stone with walls several feet thick and openings too narrow to climb through, and a ground floor designed to house livestock on the assumption that the livestock would otherwise be stolen, which it would have been. They are the architecture of a people who had decided that the world was hostile and who built accordingly. They are also, in the folk tradition of the border, the preferred dwelling of the Redcap. The Redcap, known also as Redcombe, Powrie, or Dunter in various parts of the border tradition, is recorded in the folklore of the Anglo-Scottish borderlands from at least the medieval period, in the accounts of antiquarians and local historians throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, and in the living oral tradition of border farming communities that was still being collected by folk scholars in the 1880s and 1890s. He is described, in the accounts that survive, with a consistency that is itself a kind of evidence. The same figure, described across centuries by people who cannot have read the same texts, because the texts were not yet assembled, drawn from the memory of communities that had no reason to coordinate their stories. He is old. This is the first thing every account agrees on. He appears as an old man, or as something that has the shape of an old man, small and bent, with long white hair and long unkempt teeth and eyes described as large and red, which is the detail that stops you when you first read it and does not stop stopping you. Large and red, not glowing in the supernatural sense, not the red of fire or of magic. The red of eyes that have been in the dark a very long time, or of eyes that are wrong in the specific biological way of things that are not quite what they look like, that have borrowed a shape from the human catalog and have not quite fitted it. He wears iron boots. The sound of the iron boots on stone is a detail that recurs across the accounts in the way that the most visceral sensory details recur in folk tradition, because they have been heard, because the hearing of them was the specific horror, because the body's memory of sound outlasts every other kind of memory and goes directly into the telling. Iron boots on stone in a ruin, at a time when a ruin should be empty. The sound of someone walking who should not be there, who is walking with a deliberateness that suggests they have been there a very long time and are entirely at ease in the empty space. He carries a pike or a staff in some accounts. He has long claws in others, but the defining feature, the feature from which the name comes and which all accounts agree on, and which is the thing that makes the creature what it is rather than simply a malevolent old man, is the cap. The cap is red. It is red because it has been soaked in blood, the blood of the creature's victims, the blood that must be continually renewed because if the blood on the cap dries, the creature dies. This is the mechanism. This is the specific biological horror at the center of the tradition, which is not the horror of a monster that kills for pleasure or for territory, or for the motives that human beings have when they kill each other. It is the horror of something that kills because it must, in the way that living things must do the things that keep them alive. And the living thing that must keep its cap wet is therefore in a state of permanent biological necessity that has nothing to do with malice and everything to do with the terrifying indifference of a thing that has been surviving for a very long time by the only means available to it. This is the detail that the border people lived with, not the horror of a creature that hated them, the horror of a creature that needed them, and the ruins of the border were full of it, were, in the folk understanding, always full of it. The peeled towers and the ruined abbeys and the blasted castles and the bloodied field sites, all the places where violence had been extreme enough and prolonged enough to leave something in the stone, to create the conditions in which a thing like the Redcap could establish itself and persist. The border had produced more of these conditions than almost anywhere else in Britain. The border had been producing them for 500 years. And in the folk accounting of the 19th century, the ruins were not empty. The ruins had tenants. Old, patient tenants that had been there before the ruin and would be there after the ruin returned to ground, that watched the road from the peeled tower's narrow windows with the large red eyes, that came out when something living passed that it needed. This is the folklore. This is what was known in the border counties, in the farmhouses and the market towns and the shepherds' bothies on the upland grazing, in the years before the Folklore Society came to collect it and Margaret Halcrow came to understand it. Margaret Halcrow was 37 years old in the summer of 1888, when she began what she called, in the correspondence that survives her, the Border Project. She was a Scottish woman from Edinburgh, the daughter of an advocate who had given her an education considerably broader than the period typically gave to daughters, and a correspondent of the Folklore Society since its founding in 1878. Who had contributed several papers to the Society's transactions on the subjects of Scottish household traditions, the folklore of the Lothians, and the persistence of pre-Christian observance in agricultural communities of the Scottish lowlands. She was precise, thorough, and possessed of a specific quality of intellectual courage that distinguished her from some of her contemporaries in the field. She was willing to follow the evidence into places that made the evidence uncomfortable, which was not always a welcome quality in a woman scholar of the late Victorian period, but which she maintained as a professional and personal standard regardless. The Border Project began as a systematic attempt to compile, from all available sources, a complete dossier of recorded encounters with what the local tradition called the Redcap along the Anglo-Scottish border counties. She was motivated by a paper she had read by a colleague at the Society, a Mr. Forsyth of Newcastle, who had noted in passing that the Redcap tradition was among the most geographically specific folk beliefs in the British Isles, and had suggested that a systematic geographic analysis of reported sightings might produce interesting results regarding the relationship between site-specific violence and site-specific folk belief. She wrote to Forsyth and told him she intended to pursue this, and he wrote back saying he thought it an excellent idea and that she should be the one to do it, which was the kind of encouragement that she acknowledged privately in her journal and did not mention in correspondence. She spent the years from 1888 to 1891 assembling the dossier. She wrote to solicitors, ministers, local historians, antiquarians, newspaper editors, and parish record keepers across both sides of the border. She advertised in the Folklore Society's journal for informants. She corresponded with elderly residents of border farming communities who had heard the old accounts from their own grandparents. She traveled several times through the border counties by train and by hired conveyance and on foot, interviewing people in their homes and in their fields, and on at least one occasion in the ruin itself, which was the visit of October 1891, from which she did not return to Edinburgh, but we will come to that. What she assembled over 3 years was a collection of 6 primary testimonies and 14 secondary references. The secondary references being accounts recorded by others and used by Margaret only as corroboration, the primary testimonies being documents she had obtained directly in their original form and which she had transcribed, annotated, and organized into the dossier that was found in her study by her sister Elspeth in November of 1891, and that is the basis for what follows. The dossier is presented here in the order Margaret established, which is chronological by the date of the original testimony. Her annotations between the testimonies are her own words, taken from her notes and from the letters she sent to Forsyth during the project. Where the testimony is a transcription of a spoken account, or of a wax cylinder recording, the notations in the text indicating gaps, interference, or Margaret's uncertainty about a word are Margaret's own notations, preserved exactly as she left them. She described the project, in a letter to Forsyth in March of 1891, 7 months before her disappearance, as the most important work I have done and the most frightening thing I have ever read in the course of that work. And I have spent 14 years reading frightening things as a professional matter. What frightens me is not any individual account. What frightens me is the pattern. There is a pattern in these testimonies that the individual witnesses could not have known about. That is visible only when the accounts are assembled together. And when you see it, you cannot decide whether it is a coincidence or something more than a coincidence. And the inability to decide that question is the thing that keeps me awake, not any specific detail of what any specific person saw. She did not describe in that letter what the pattern was. The pattern is visible in the assembled dossier. Read the testimonies in order and the pattern finds you. This is Margaret's design, deliberate, the design of a woman who understood how horror builds, who understood that the thing seen all at once is less terrible than the thing that arrives. Read in order. Begin with the first testimony. The first document in the dossier is a letter. It is written on a single large sheet of laid paper, folded twice and addressed on the reverse in a firm commercial hand to Mr. Thomas Harelaw, solicitor, Jedburgh, Roxburghshire, and it bears a date of the 14th of March in the year 1801. It was located by Margaret in the archives of the Jedburgh firm of Harelaw and Sons, whose partners in 1888 were the grandsons of the original Thomas Harelaw, and who kept a remarkable quantity of historical correspondence in what they described to her as simply the old room, which was a back room of their offices stacked with documents going back to the 1770s. Margaret spent 3 days in the old room before she found the letter. She described the finding of it in her notes as the moment the project became something I could not put down. The letter is written by a man who identifies himself as James Whitelaw, a cloth merchant of Carlisle, and it is addressed to Mr. Harelaw in his capacity as the family's solicitor in Jedburgh, because Whitelaw was, at the time of writing, in Jedburgh, having arrived there the previous evening, in a condition that he describes in the letter's opening lines as severely disordered, by which he means shaken to a degree that his family's solicitor needs to be informed of his whereabouts, and of the reason he will not be at home when expected. He writes as follows, and Margaret's transcript preserves his spelling and his punctuation, which was erratic, as the spelling and punctuation of a man writing quickly and without revision, getting the thing down before the composure he is working to maintain runs out. He writes, "Dear Mr. Halcrow, I write to you from the inn at Edinburgh where I have been since last evening. I am well in body, though not, I confess, well in mind, which is the reason for this letter. I was on the border road between Carter Bar and Edinburgh, which I have travelled perhaps 30 times in 20 years of the cloth trade, and I know it as well as I know the road from my own house to the market. I had been delayed at Carter Bar by the weather, which was a hard wind and rain from the west, and by the time the weather permitted me to proceed it was past 4 o'clock and the light was going. My driver is a capable man, and I had no hesitation in proceeding in poor light on a road we both know well." He writes, "We had come perhaps 4 miles on the Edinburgh side of the bar when the horse stopped. She is not a horse that stops without cause. She is a steady animal, 16 years old, not given to starts or to hesitation. She stopped and she would not move, and when my driver spoke to her and encouraged her with the reins she did not respond to him, which was so unlike her usual behavior that I stepped down from the chaise to see what the matter was. The road ahead of us was clear as far as I could see in the remaining light. The moorland on either side was clear. There was nothing I could see that warranted the horse's behavior." He writes, "It was my driver who saw it first, which is to say it was my driver who told me where to look, because when I looked at the ruin, and here he describes a peel tower to the left of the road, set perhaps 100 yards back from the road on a small rise. A ruin he identifies by its position as the tower that local people called Craw's Peel, which Margaret has annotated as consistent with a ruined tower in Roxburghshire, the original name of which she has researched and confirmed. When I looked at the ruin," he said, "in the lower window, and I looked at the lower window of the ruin, which is to say the opening at the ground level of the tower, which is without glass or shutter, and I will describe what I saw as plainly as I am able." He writes, "There was a figure in the window. It was crouching, or seated, or arranged in a posture that I cannot describe more precisely, because the specific arrangement of the limbs was not the arrangement of a person sitting comfortably, but was rather the arrangement of something that has been in a small space for a very long time, and has adapted itself to the dimensions of that space, without reference to the postures that are natural to a human body. It appeared to be an old man, or to have the general form of an old man, white hair, a bent back, a face that was turned toward us from the window with the attention of something that has been watching the road, and is now watching us specifically, which was the quality of the attention that I found most difficult to accommodate. It was not startled by us. It was not alarmed. It had the quality of something that had been expecting something on the road and was now satisfied that what it had been expecting had arrived." He writes, "I could see no color in the fading light with any reliability. I could not see the specific features of the face clearly at the distance and in the light available. I can tell you that my driver, who was closer to the window than I was and who has better eyesight than I do, said afterward, when we were safely at the inn and I had given him a glass, the eyes were not right. He could not tell me more than that. The eyes were not right. I have been attempting since last evening to find a different way of understanding what I saw. I have not found one. I want you to know where I am and why I am here, and that I will be home as soon as I am able, and that I am well in body, and that I am sorry to trouble you with this." The letter ends there. There is no formal closing. Margaret has noted, "Whitelaw arrived home safely. His family papers, which I obtained permission to examine from his granddaughter in Carlisle, contain no further reference to the incident. He does not appear to have spoken of it. The letter to Halcrow appears to have been written to establish a record, to put the account somewhere external to himself, which is what a man does when he has seen something he cannot carry alone. He sent it to his solicitor because a solicitor is a custodian of things that need to be kept. He wanted it kept. Margaret has added, "Note the horse. Note the way the figure was in the window without surprise. Note that it was watching the road." I did not note the significance of these details in the first reading. I noted them in the second, after I had read the third testimony. The second document is not a letter. It is 7 pages torn from a pocket notebook. The pages ruled, the paper cheap, the handwriting the small, laborious handwriting of a man not accustomed to writing much and doing it by the labor of someone for whom the pen is a less natural tool than the crook or the knife. The pages were given to Margaret in 1889 by a farming family in Roxburghshire, who had kept them in a tin box with their grandfather's effects. Not because they knew what the pages said. None of them could read the writing, which is cramped and idiosyncratic, but because their grandfather had told their father to keep them, and their father had told them, and the box had stayed on the shelf above the farm kitchen fireplace for 60 years. The grandfather's name was Robert Elliot, and he was a shepherd on the upland grazing above the Jed Water in the early decades of the century. And the pages are dated across a period of 4 days in November of the year 1823, which makes Elliot a man of approximately 40 at the time of writing. Margaret has noted that the effort of the handwriting and the evident difficulty of the writing process are significant because they indicate that Elliot wrote these pages under conditions of urgency. A man who did not write easily would not have filled 7 pages in 4 days unless the writing felt necessary. He wrote, she believes, for the same reason Whitelaw wrote to his solicitor, to put it somewhere, to make it external. The pages read in Margaret's transcript as follows. She has preserved Eliot's irregular capitalization and his particular habit of beginning a new sentence on a new line, even in the middle of a thought, which she says gives the pages a quality of a man writing in the pauses between things rather than in uninterrupted time. He writes on the first day, lost 3 sheep on the south pasture above the ruin, not taken by dog, not fallen, not there. The ground around the ruin was disturbed in the morning. I did not go close to the ruin. I have not gone close to it in 20 years. Father told me not to go close to it, and I have not, and I will not. 3 sheep. He writes, on the second day, went up to the south pasture with the dog at first light. The dog would not go near the ruin. The dog is a sound animal, 8 years old, has worked this ground her whole life, knows every stone of it. She would not go near the ruin. We went around it wide. I found the place where the sheep had been. I will not describe what I found there. It was at the base of the ruin's east wall in the angle where the wall meets the ground. The ground there is always wet, always, even in the dry summer, always wet. I have never understood it, and I have never tried to understand it, and I do not intend to now. There was red on the stones of the east wall at about the height of a man's knee. There was red in the wet ground. I took the dog and I went back to the pasture, and I counted the remaining sheep, and they were all there, and I put them on the north pasture, away from the ruin, and I came down. He writes, on the third day, I told James Renwick about the sheep, which was a mistake. He asked what took them. I said I did not know. He said he had heard there was something at the old tower again, that a man passing on the road last week had come into the village shaking, and had said he had seen something in the ruin window. I asked him what the man had said he saw. He said, something old that was watching. He said the man was a sensible man, a carrier from Howick, not a man given to fancies. I said, I know. He looked at me. He said, how long has it been there, do you think? I said, my father knew it was there. His father knew it before him. He said, what does it do in the winter? I had no answer to that. I have thought about it since. I think it does what it needs to do in the winter. I think it manages. He writes on the fourth day in a handwriting more compressed than the previous pages, as if he was writing faster. I saw it last night. I was not near the ruin. I was at the far end of the north pasture, which is a long way from the ruin, half a mile or more, checking on the sheep in the last of the light, and I turned to go back down the hill, and it was standing at the edge of the pasture, at the stone wall, on the other side of the wall from where I was. It was not big. It was the size of an old man bent with the white hair hanging down. It was looking at the sheep, not at me, at the sheep. It had its hands on the top of the wall, and it was looking at the sheep the way you look at a thing you are deciding about. I did not move. I did not make a sound. The dog was with me, and she pressed against my leg, and I put my hand on her and I held her, and she did not make a sound either. We stood there, and I do not know how long we stood there. Then it turned and looked at me, and I saw the eyes, which were large, and I could see the color even in the failing light, even at that distance, which were red, which I will not think about any further than saying that. And then it was gone. It was just not there. I did not see it go. One moment it was at the wall, and the next moment I was standing in the pasture in the last of the light, with the dog pressed against my leg, and the sheep quiet behind me, and nothing at the wall. I went home. I am writing this down. Father said to write it down if you ever saw it. He said, write it down so there is a record, so someone else knows, so you are not the only one carrying it. The pages end there. Margaret has written. The father's instruction to write it down. Note it. Someone else knew. There is always someone else who knows in these communities, who passes the instruction to the next person, to write it down if you see it, to make a record, to not carry it alone. This is the folk archive. This is what I am doing here. I am the person the instruction was always heading toward. She has also written, separately, the hands on the wall, the way it was looking at the sheep, the decision that was visible in how it looked. I have read this page many times, and the detail that stays with me most is the decision. It was deciding. It was making a choice about whether the sheep or the man, the sheep. It chose the sheep that time. I read this and I think, which would have been worse? The third testimony in the dossier is a formal document. It is headed, in the hand of a Church of Scotland minister, as follows. A statement of account given by William Hartlaw of the parish of Southdean, Roxburghshire, at the time of his death, recorded by the undersigned as a matter of parish record. Signed, Reverend Alexander Cairns, minister of Southdean. Dated the 3rd of February, 1847. This is the document that Margaret has annotated most heavily, with notes in the margins and on separate sheets folded inside the document's cover. She obtained it from the parish records of Southdean, where it had been kept among the minister's personal papers, separate from the official records of the parish, which suggests that Cairns had not known how to file it and had kept it privately rather than not at all. William Hartlaw was, at the time of his death, an old man of somewhere between 75 and 80 years, a former drover who had spent 50 years moving cattle and sheep along the border roads between the farming communities of Roxburghshire and the markets at Carlisle and Newcastle. He had known the border roads thoroughly, in the way of a man who has walked them in all weathers in all seasons for half a century. And he had known the ruins along the roads with the specific knowledge of a man who planned his overnight stops around which ruins were safe to shelter in and which were not. The statement, as Cairns recorded it, is a dying man's account, delivered in the abbreviated, careful language of someone who is spending what energy remains on the essential thing, who has decided that the essential thing is to say this before he cannot say anything. Cairns has noted at the top of the document, I was called to the bedside by Hartlaw's daughter on the 2nd of February. He had been declining for several weeks and was believed to be near the end. He asked me specifically to record what he told me and to keep the record, and to give it to anyone who had a serious interest in these matters. He said he had been waiting all his life to tell this to someone who would do something with it, and that he hoped I was that person. I told him I would record it faithfully and keep it faithfully. I have. I do not know who the right person is to give it to. I will know them when they come. Margaret has noted in the margin, Cairns died in 1881. His successor found the document among the private papers and kept it, as Cairns had instructed, without knowing why. When I came in 1889 and introduced myself and explained the project, the successor said, "Cairns told me someone would come. He was quite certain about it. I did not know until this moment that he was right." The statement in Cairns's careful transcription is as follows. Halcrow said, "I have known about the towers all my life. Every drover knows them. You learn which ones are empty and which ones are not before your first winter on the road, or you learn it the hard way. And the men who learn it the hard way mostly don't come back to tell you how they learned. My father taught me. He had it from his father. There are 5 towers on the road between Carter Bar and Jedburgh that you do not shelter in. There are 3 on the road between Jedburgh and Newcastle. There is one on the road that comes down from Howick through the hills to Carlisle. That one is the worst. You give that one a wide road in the dark." He said, "I have seen it 4 times in 50 years. The first time I was 22 and did not know yet. The other 3 times I knew what I was looking at and I gave it space, which is the only thing you can do. You give it space and you do not run, because it can cover ground faster than a man running and slower than it seems it should be able to. It is very fast for what it looks like, which is an old man. If you run, it follows. If you stand and you are still and you give it space and you do not look directly at the eyes, it will make its assessment. And if you are not what it needs at that moment, it will go back, and you will be able to move on." Cairns has noted in the margin, I asked him what he meant by what it needs. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said what follows. Halcrow said, "The cap. You know about the cap. Everyone on the border knows about the cap. The cap has to be kept wet or it dies. If the cap is wet, if it has been recent, it does not need you. That is when you have the best chance. You give it space, you stand still, you move on when it lets you. If the cap is dry or drying, it needs you and you have very little that will help you except the word of God spoken aloud, which sometimes works and sometimes does not, depending on how dry the cap is. If the cap is very dry, you are in God's hands entirely. In 50 years I saw it with a wet cap 3 times and a dry cap once. The dry cap time was on the Howick Road, the bad one I told you about, and I was with 2 other men and one of them ran. I did not run, the 3rd man did not run. The man who ran did not reach Howick, we did. We stood very still in the dark of the road for what I believe was close to half an hour, not looking at it directly, saying the 23rd Psalm quietly but with intention, and it made its assessment, and we were apparently not what it needed at that moment, which I have spent 40 years being grateful for without expecting to understand. He said, "The cap was a dark red on the 3 occasions when I saw it clearly. Old dark red, like blood that has been there for some time, darker in the middle, wetter at the edges where it hangs down over the ears, not fresh. On the 4th occasion, the cap was lighter, more orange than red, almost pale at the top. I have never seen a pale cap since and I do not want to," he said, and Cairns has noted that this was the last sustained statement before Halcrow's energy failed and the account became fragmentary. I want someone to know the roads. I want someone to know which towers and where they are. I am going to die with this in my head, and someone needs to have it out of my head before I go. There are people on those roads every year who do not know. Young men and women traveling for the first time. People from the south who have not been told. The locals know. The road people know. But the ones who have never been told are the ones who shelter in the wrong tower, or who come along the road at the wrong hour, or who run when they should stand still. And those ones. And he did not finish the sentence. Cairns has written. He was not able to finish it. He died the following evening. I believe he knew what he wanted me to know about the ones who had not been told. Margaret has written in her own notes following this document. Halcrow gives us the mechanism. The cap. The drying of the cap as the driver of behavior. This is the first account I have found that provides this level of functional detail, and I recognize it from the folk literature, from Leighton and Henderson and the other collectors, but hearing it from a man who has been on those roads for 50 years and has applied it as practical knowledge, has used it as a survival strategy, that is different from the academic literature. That is knowledge in the body. He knew it the way you know which fields flood and which hold, the way you know which animals in the herd are reliable and which are not. It was management. He managed it. She has also written, The Man Who Ran. I keep thinking about the man who ran. The fourth testimony is a letter, and it is longer than the first. It is dated the 18th of August, 1861, and it is written by a man who signs himself John Amos Telfer, schoolmaster, to his brother David Telfer of Newcastle. It was provided to Margaret by David Telfer's daughter, who had kept her father's correspondence, and who had, Margaret notes, brought the letter out already before I had finished explaining what I was looking for, which tells you everything about whether she had thought about it over the years. John Telfer was a schoolmaster at a parish school in a village whose name Margaret has withheld in her transcript, noting only that it is within the 20-mile stretch of road that she has by this point in the project identified as the primary area of concentrated Redcap activity, and that withholding the village name is a professional courtesy to the community, which did not ask to be in her dossier, and whose children attend the school of the man who wrote this letter. The letter begins conventionally, with remarks about the summer, the harvest prospects, the school's examination results, the condition of the schoolmaster's cottage, before pivoting in the third page of a 7-page letter to what John Telfer actually sat down to write to his brother about. He writes, David, I must tell you what happened in the last week of July because I cannot tell anyone here and I need to have told someone, and you are the person I trust with things I cannot say in the parish. You will think I have been in the sun too long or been reading too many of those German tales that the lending library gets in. You may be right. I have been trying to tell myself I am right about that for 3 weeks and I am not convincing myself. Here is what happened. He writes, I was walking on the road north of the village, which I do most evenings in the summer when the light lasts, because I have been walking that road for 6 years without incident, and it is pleasant walking country. I had gone further than usual, perhaps 3 miles from the village, and was coming back in the last of the long summer evening light. This is important. It was still light. It was perhaps 8:30 in the evening and the sky was still pale when I heard the sound ahead of me on the road. I say sound because I do not know what else to call it. It was a sound I did not immediately recognize, which is to say I heard it and my mind worked through several categories of familiar sound and found nothing that matched. It was a regular sound, a step, but with a quality to it that was wrong. That was harder than a footstep on a road should be, as if the boot sole were iron, which I thought was an odd thought to have, and so I noted it. And then I saw the figure. He writes, it was on the road ahead of me, coming toward me from the north, which is to say from the direction of the ruin above the road that the local people call Adder's Tower, and it was moving in the deliberate way of something that is going somewhere specific, not ambling, not wandering, moving with the economy of something that knows where it is and where it is going. In the evening light it looked like an old man, small and bent with white hair. I thought, a very old man on the road alone in the evening. I should speak to him. He may need help. I am telling you what I thought and what I did because I want you to understand the sequence, which was entirely rational until it was not, and the transition between the rational and the not rational was very fast. He writes, I called out to him. I said something like, "Good evening, are you all right? Can I help you?" And the figure stopped. It stopped and it turned and it looked at me. And this is where I run out of the rational, David, because what I saw when it turned and looked at me was not the face of a very old man in the way I had been prepared for, which is to say a human face showing the marks of extreme old age, which is still recognizably a human face, and is something I have seen and know. What I saw was something else's use of that category. Something that had put on the available shape, old, small, white-haired, stooped, without having the inside of it, without having ever been young, without the history that a very old person carries in a face, the history of having once been a child, of having once been someone who was surprised by the world and then not surprised, and then made their peace with it. There was no peace in that face. There was only the assessment. It looked at me the way you look at a thing you are measuring for a purpose that is entirely yours and not the thing's. He writes, the eyes were red. I will say this plainly and you can form whatever opinion of me you choose. The eyes were red and large and entirely still, and they did not blink while I was being looked at, which was for approximately, and here he pauses, in the way you can see a man pause in the middle of a sentence when he is looking inward for accurate measurement, approximately 40 seconds, a very long 40 seconds. And then it turned back and it went on down the road, and I stood on the road and I watched it until I could not see it anymore. And I did not move until I could not see it anymore. And then I walked back to the village at a pace that was not quite running, but was the fastest walking I have done since I was 12 years old. He writes, I asked in the village that evening, carefully, indirectly, about the history of Adder's Tower. I was told, by the woman who keeps the post office, who is 70 years old and who has lived in this parish her entire life, that you keep away from Adder's Tower, which she said with the matter-of-factness of someone saying you keep away from the Bull's Field, a practical statement about a practical reality. I asked her why. She looked at me as if I were a child who had asked why you kept away from the Bull's Field. She said, because of what lives there, and she went back to her sorting. He writes, I looked at me and saw what I must have looked like because she relented slightly and she said, you didn't know. I said I had not. She said, a schoolmaster ought to know. She did not say it unkindly. She said, it's old. It's been in that tower since before my mother's time. You leave it alone and it mostly leaves you alone, but you don't go on that road after dark, and you don't shelter in the ruin. And if you see it, you stand still and you don't look at its eyes and you let it decide. And then you come back and you say nothing about it to the children. David, she said, and then she went back to her sorting. As if this were simply a thing you knew, like the flooding fields, like the bull, like the ordinary practical knowledge of the place. Simply a thing you knew. He writes in the letter's final paragraph, I am a schoolmaster. I believe in the orderly transmission of knowledge, in the primacy of evidence, in the capacity of rational investigation to account for the phenomena of the world. I am telling you that I stood on the road north of this village on the evening of the 26th of July, at 8:30 in the long summer light, and I saw something I cannot account for by any rational investigation I know how to conduct. I am also telling you that a woman of 70 years gave me information about that something that she treated as ordinary local knowledge, as the kind of thing a person who lives in a place knows the way they know the flooding fields and the bull. And I am telling you that what unsettles me most is not what I saw. What unsettles me most is how long that knowledge has been there, quiet in the parish, in the post office woman's family for as far back as she can account for it, simply there, practical, unquestioned, passed from mother to daughter the way you pass knowledge that matters. It has been there, and I did not know, and the children in my school do not know, and I do not know what, if anything, I am supposed to do about that. He did not do anything about it. Margaret has found no further reference in his papers or in the village's records. He taught for another 19 years at the parish school, and his school records are thorough and excellent, and there is no mention of the road north of the village or of Adder's Tower, or of anything connected with the account in his letter to his brother. He kept the knowledge and he taught the children, and he did not tell the children, which was what the post office woman had told him to do, which was what everyone in the parish had always done. He learned the local knowledge and he applied it, and he did not examine it further, because examining it further did not seem like something that would leave him in a better position than not examining it. He was not wrong about that. This is something Margaret has written in her notes, and she has put a question mark after it, and then crossed out the question mark and put it back. The fifth testimony is different in nature from the others. It is not a letter, and it is not a journal, and it is not a minister's transcription of a dying man's account. It is the printed transcript of a wax cylinder recording, made by Margaret herself in September of 1887, a year before the border project formally began, on a visit to the border that Margaret describes in her project notes as the visit that made the project inevitable. On an Edison phonograph borrowed from the Folklore Society's equipment stock, in the kitchen of a farmhouse in Roxburghshire. The speaker on the recording is a woman identified in Margaret's notes as Mrs. Isabel Dunbar, age 81 years, of the parish of Southdean, Roxburghshire. Margaret has noted that Dunbar was the daughter of a shepherd who had worked the same upland grazing as Robert Elliot 60 years before, that she had been born and had lived her entire life within 4 miles of the ruins she speaks about, and that she was, at the time of recording, in full possession of all her faculties, and was described by everyone Margaret spoke to in the parish as the person to speak to if you wanted to know about the old things. The transcript notation system is Margaret's own. Words in square brackets indicate Margaret's uncertainty about the transcribed word. Dashes indicate gaps in the recording where the cylinder was too damaged to transcribe. And the notation interference indicates passages where background noise on the recording made transcription impossible. The recording was made on a September afternoon in a farmhouse kitchen, and the background sounds of the kitchen, the fire, the movement of animals in the yard are present throughout. The transcript is as follows. Mrs. Dunbar speaks. They are in the towers, the ones with the bad history, not all the old towers, mind you, not every ruin, the ones with the bad history, the ones where blood was spilled and not just a bit, not an accident or a wound. A great deal of blood over a long time by people who were doing it intentionally. The border had plenty of those. The towers soaked it up. And then something moved in. Something that had been out on the moor, something very old, something that had always needed what those towers now had in the stones. It moved in and it stayed. It's been in those towers since before anyone can say when. She speaks. My grandmother told me about the one above the south pasture. She had it from her grandmother. That's 4 generations back, which takes you into the 1700s, and even then it was spoken of as something that had been there a very long time. Nobody went near it after dark. Nobody sheltered in it. You knew which towers you could use for shelter on the hill and which you could not, and nobody argued about it, and nobody explained it to outsiders unless the outsider was going to be on the road. She speaks. Interference. The cap. My grandmother said you could tell from a distance sometimes. If the smell was strong, the cap was wet. There is a smell. It interference, iron, and something under it that is older than iron. If you could smell it from the road, you knew it had been recent, and you were probably gap in recording, approximately 12 seconds. Safe enough if you were careful. If there was no smell, that was when you interference. God help you. You said your psalm and you did not run. She speaks. I have never seen it. I want to be clear about that. I have smelled it twice in my life, and both times I was with my father, and he knew what to do, and he did it, and we were gap. But I have never seen it directly. My father saw it once. He said afterward, and he only said it once, that what he had not expected was how patient it was. He said it stood at the ruin wall, and it looked at him, and it had all the time in the world, and he was a thing on a road, and it was waiting to see what he was going to do. And he understood in that moment that it had always been there, that it had been standing at that wall longer than his family had been in the parish, longer than the parish had been a parish, and that it was going to be standing at that wall long after his family was gone, and that this was simply the situation, and it had no opinions about the situation. He said it did not hate me. He was very clear about that. He said, it did not hate me, it just needed me. And that is different. That is much interference, approximately 30 seconds, she speaks. The children know not to go near the towers. We tell them before we tell them most things. We tell them as soon as they are old enough to go further from the house than the yard. We say, the old towers on the hill, you know them, you know the ones I mean, you stay away. Don't go near. Don't shelter in. Don't go near after dark ever. If you ever see something old at the window or at the wall of the ruin, you stand still, you say the 23rd Psalm, you do not run. We tell them this before we tell them about the road to school, before we tell them about the bull. We tell them this first. She speaks. I've told Gap 4 children and 6 grandchildren. My grandmother told my mother, and my mother told me, and I have told mine, and they have told theirs. That's how long this has been in the parish. That's how far back it goes. I cannot say further back than that because I have no one to tell me further back than that. But further back than that is a very long time, and in all that time the tower has stood there, and the thing has been in it, and the people of the parish have known what to do about it. And no one from the parish has been taken by it in my grandmother's memory or my mother's memory or my own, which I put down to the teaching. We teach the children first before anything else. We teach them what to do. She speaks. The ones who are taken are the interference, outsiders, travelers, people on the road who have not been told. Gap approximately 20 seconds. My grandmother said there was a family that came from the south, from England, that settled on the interference farm in the 1800s, that did not know. The father went up to look at the south pasture with a view to grazing it, because it was good grass, and he went near the tower. Gap. My grandmother said they found the interference, approximately 45 seconds, and after that the farm was sold and the English family went back south, and the south pasture has not been grazed since by anyone who knows. The grass is very good up there. Nobody goes. She speaks. And this is the last passage before the recording ends. I am not afraid of it. I want to say that plainly. I am 81 years old and I have lived 4 miles from that tower my whole life, and I am not afraid of it because I know what it is and I know what to do about it, and I have taught my children and they have taught theirs, and we will go on teaching. The fear is for people who don't know. I feel Gap sorry for them. It has nothing against them. It just needs them, and they don't know how not to be needed. That is the interference, tragedy of it, I think, not the creature. The creature is just what it is. The tragedy is the not knowing. The recording ends. Margaret has written after the transcript. I sat with Mrs. Dunbar for 3 hours after the recording ended without the phonograph, and she told me a great deal more than the cylinder captured. I will put some of it in the analysis. But the sentence I keep returning to is the one near the end. She is not afraid of it. She is 81 years old and she has lived 4 miles from it her entire life, and she is not afraid. Because she knows. The knowledge is the protection. The knowledge that has been passed down in that parish for longer than anyone can trace, mother to child, before the school and before the bull and before anything else. 4 generations at minimum, possibly much more. The not knowing is the tragedy. She said this without anger. She said it with sorrow, which is a different thing entirely. Between the 5th testimony and the 6th, between the transcript of the wax cylinder recording and the last document in the dossier, there are 17 pages of Margaret's own analysis, in which she lays out the pattern she has been building toward across 3 years of the project. She wrote to Forsyth in March of 1891 that the pattern frightened her. These 17 pages are why. The pattern is this. Margaret has mapped, on a large ordnance survey map of the Anglo-Scottish border, the locations associated with each of the testimonies and the secondary references that she has not reproduced in full in the dossier. She has marked the towers identified or indicated in each account. She has marked the areas of reported sightings, the stretches of road described in each account, the pastures and fields and distances from the ruins that each account provides. The marks cluster. They cluster with a specificity that is not consistent with random distribution across the border region. They are concentrated in a stretch of approximately 23 miles of the border road running south from Carter Bar, in a band that includes 5 specific ruined towers on the Roxburghshire side and 3 on the Northumberland side. 8 towers in 23 miles. The accounts from across 90 years are all within this band. The secondary references, which Margaret has not reproduced but which she lists by source and date, are also within this band. She has drawn a second feature on the map. She has traced the line of a particular geological formation, a band of older stone running beneath the later moorland geology, visible on the surface as a ridge in the ground in several places, as a particular darkness in the peat in others, as a specific pattern of wetness on the land that does not drain in the way the surrounding moorland drains. This band of older stone runs beneath the entire 23-mile stretch. It runs beneath all 8 of the towers. The ground is always wet, Robert Elliot had written, in the root of the east wall of the ruin. Always wet, even in the dry summer. Always wet. Margaret has written, I believe the geological formation is relevant. I believe the persistent wetness of the ground around these specific towers is relevant. I am not in a position to say how. I have consulted with a geologist of the Society's acquaintance, and he describes the formation as unusual in the specific sense of producing a constant upwelling of mineral-rich groundwater that has no obvious surface source, and that has been present since at least the period of the tower's original construction, which he can confirm from the specific weathering patterns of the tower stone. The towers were built where they were built, in part, because of the groundwater. Reliable water was a military necessity in a fortification. But the water was there before the towers. The water has been there since before the towers in a continuous upwelling from a geological source that predates the human settlement of the region by an unknowable period. And the specific towers over this specific water are the ones in the accounts. All of the accounts, 90 years of accounts, all in the same 23 miles, all above the same water. She has written, I do not know what this means. I know what it suggests, which is that the presence of the Redcap and the presence of the geological formation are not coincidental, which suggests that the creature's relationship to the specific place is older than any of the structures built on it, which suggests that the towers were not the original home, but were simply the most recent convenient structure in a landscape that the creature had been in for very much longer, that the creature predates the towers as a category of dwelling, that the creature is in the land, not in the specific ruin, and the ruin is simply the most recent and most convenient shelter in a landscape that the creature has occupied since a time I cannot determine. She has written, "This is the finding that I believe makes the project significant beyond the scope of a regional folk belief study. This is not a local haunting. This is not a supernatural entity associated with a specific structure, which is the category the academic literature tends to use for Redcap accounts. This is something in a specific 23-mile band of the border that has been there for an undeterminable period of time, that has been known by the communities living within it and incorporated into their practical knowledge as a managed presence, that takes travelers who pass through the band without knowing about it, and that the academic and governmental institutions of the period have so entirely failed to document as a coherent phenomenon that no one has previously noticed that every account is from the same 23 miles. She has written, "I am going to visit Hermitage Castle in October. I want to see the primary site of the tradition from the inside. I want to walk the 23 miles on the road and stand in the places that the accounts come from, because there is a quality of knowledge that you can only get from being in a place, that does not come from maps or transcripts or any amount of reading in a study in Edinburgh. I know this from field work. I know this from the difference between reading about a place and standing in it. I need to stand in it. I have written to Forsyth to tell him I am going. He has written back telling me to take care, which is Forsyth's way of telling me he is worried, and Forsyth does not worry easily, which is something I have noted and which I am choosing for the time being to set aside." The analysis ends. The sixth and final document begins. The sixth document is Margaret's own field notes from the border visit of October 1891. They are not a completed report. They are working notes, written in a notebook that is smaller than her usual field notebooks, the kind of notebook you put in a coat pocket rather than a bag, the kind of notebook you take when you expect to be on foot in difficult country and want your hands free. The handwriting is her standard field hand, quick, compressed, highly legible for a quick hand, with her usual system of abbreviations and margin markers. The notes run to 46 pages, which is a great deal of material for a single week of field work, but which is consistent with what Margaret did in conditions of high interest, which was to write continuously, to get everything down, to leave nothing unrecorded in case she needed it later. She needed it later. She did not get later. The notes are the last thing in the dossier. The early notes cover the journey from Edinburgh by train, the transition at Carlisle, the journey north by hired conveyance, the quality of the weather, which was cold and clear, the specific autumn quality of the border light, which she describes as the kind of light that makes the distances look smaller than they are, and the ruins look older than they look in any other season, which is older than you are prepared for. She notes the first sight of Hermitage Castle from the road, which she has been to before and which she describes again, because she wants the description fresh in this light from this road on this day. She writes, "It is not like other castles. It is not beautiful in any way that can be separated from what it is, which is a place where terrible things were done for a very long time by people who were entirely capable of terrible things, and who did not require any supernatural assistance to be terrible. The stone is very dark. The stream beside it is very cold. The walls go up from the flat ground with the bluntness of something that does not need to apologize for what it is. I have always found this quality more frightening than any amount of Gothic embellishment would have been." She walks the border road. She covers the 23 miles over 2 days, north to south, stopping at each of the 8 towers she has identified, observing and noting. Her notes at each tower are methodical. The current state of the structure, the geological features of the immediate ground, the presence and quality of the groundwater, the visibility of the tower from the road and of the road from the tower, the flora of the immediate ruin, the condition of any remaining upper stories. She is precise and she is professional and she is, you can see in the notes, managing something that sits beneath the professionalism, that surfaces occasionally in the margins in ways that the main text does not permit. At the third tower, which is the one above the south pasture associated with Eliot's journal and with Isabel Dunbar's account, she has written in the main text, groundwater upwelling confirmed at east wall base, standing water in the angle where wall meets ground. Persistent, clear, no visible surface source, and in the margin in a smaller hand bracketed, the ground is wet. At the fifth tower, which she identifies as Craw's Peel from Whitelaw's 18:1 letter, she has written, lower opening faces road as described. Ground visibility from the interior confirmed. A person or figure at this window would have a clear line of sight to the road at the distance Whitelaw gives. The visibility from the road to the interior is more limited. You can see into the opening, but the interior is dark enough that something in the back of the space, or to the side of the opening, would not be immediately visible from the road. And in the margin, something to the side of the opening, I am standing 20 yards from the window and I cannot see the full interior. Whitelaw said it was crouching. You would have to be crouching to be fully visible from the road at this angle while remaining inside the space. You would have to have positioned yourself to be seen. She continues through the sixth and seventh towers without marginal notes, only main text, professional and complete. She reaches the eighth tower, the one farthest south, closest to the Northumberland border, the one she has identified from Hartlaw's deathbed account as the Howick Road Tower, the bad one. Her main text notes at this tower are shorter than at the others. She writes, structure substantially intact compared to the others, which is unusual and worth noting. 3 stories still standing. Roof partially collapsed at the south end, but the north end of the third story is still roofed, which means the interior has a degree of shelter not found in the more ruined structures. Ground conditions consistent with other sites. The groundwater upwelling is more pronounced here than at any of the others. The east angle of the wall is standing in perhaps 2 inches of water that is moving, which is to say the upwelling is active and continuous, not pooled. The soil immediately around the east wall is very dark, darker than the surrounding moorland soil, with a color and texture I am going to describe as extremely rich, which is a botanical description, the description of a soil with very high organic content, the description of a soil that has been fed for a very long time. In the margin at this point she has written, I can smell it. She has written nothing more in the margin of that page. The next page begins with main text, and the main text continues for 3 more pages in the professional, complete, methodical manner of everything that has preceded it. And then on the 4th page the handwriting changes. It does not change dramatically. It is still Margaret's hand, still legible, still her abbreviations and her system. But the pace has changed, in the way that the pace of a hand changes when the writing is being done faster, when the hand is moving to keep up with something that needs to be gotten down before the moment it belongs to closes. She writes, it is at the window. North Tower, 2nd level, the narrow window that faces east. I am at the road. I cannot see clearly at this light and this distance. I am not going to go closer. I have my notebook and I am writing in it, and I am looking at the window with as much peripheral attention as I can manage while writing in my notebook, which is to say, I am not looking directly at the window. I am maintaining the oblique attention that Hartlaw described and that Telford described and that the post office woman's method produces. I am standing still. I have been standing still for several minutes. She writes, it is very still. The window is very dark, and it is very still within it. And I know, I am not manufacturing this because my body knows before my mind knows, which is the biological response that I have read about in the literature, and am now experiencing, which is that the body identifies the presence before the mind has categorized it, and the body's response precedes any cognitive assessment of whether the response is warranted. And my body has identified something in that window and is responding to it with considerable force, and I am writing in my notebook, and I am standing still, and I am saying, very quietly under my breath, the 23rd Psalm. I know it by heart, which is something I have never before had occasion to be grateful for, and I am grateful for it now. She writes, "The light is going. It is October and it is 5 o'clock, and the light is going faster than I expected. I should have been off this road before now. This is a miscalculation, and I am acknowledging it, and I am not going to panic about it, because panic is not useful, and standing still is what is useful, and I am standing still. I have said the psalm 4 times. I am going to say it again." She writes, "It has not moved. It has been in the window for," and here she gives a time which Margaret has written as approximately 12 minutes, though she has put a question mark after the number, because in conditions of high attention time distorts, and she knows it, and it has not moved. "I am 40 yards from the window. I cannot see the eyes at this distance in this light. I am glad I cannot see the eyes at this distance in this light." She writes, "I need to move. The light is going, and I cannot be on this road in full dark. I know this. I know what Hartlaw said, and what Eliot said, and what the post office woman said about the road in full dark, about the south pasture in the last of the light, about running. I am going to move. I am going to move slowly southward, keeping the tower to my right, not running. I know what I know. I have spent 3 years learning what I know, and I know what I know." She writes, 23rd Psalm, walking now. She writes, "It is not in the window." She writes, "It is not in the window, and I do not know where it is, and this is," and the sentence stops. The notes continue on the next page, and the page after that, and the page after that, in a handwriting that is increasingly compressed, increasingly fast, that is still legible, that is still Margaret's hand. That is the hand of a woman who is still writing, because writing is the discipline that holds everything else together, and she is holding everything together with it. And the pages are field notes, observations, notations of the road and the light and the conditions, professional and complete in the way that everything she has ever written has been professional and complete. And there are 23 more pages after the sentence that stops. And they are the record of a woman walking south on the border road in the failing October light, saying the 23rd Psalm quietly, and writing in her notebook, and knowing what she knows. The notes end at page 46. The entry is, "I can see the lights of the village. The road is clear ahead." The sentence does not finish. Elspeth Halcrow, Margaret's sister, found the dossier in the study of the Edinburgh house when she travelled from Glasgow in November of 1891, 3 weeks after Margaret had failed to return as scheduled from the border visit. The dossier was assembled and complete, in the order you have encountered it here, with a cover note in Margaret's hand addressed to the Folklore Society, asking that it be received and preserved, and that its contents be read by anyone working seriously in the field of border folklore, and particularly by anyone planning to travel on the border road. The cover note also addresses Forsyth by name. It says, "Forsyth. The pattern is real and the cause of the pattern is real, and both are old enough that the category of real hardly begins to cover it. I am going to go and stand in the place the pattern comes from, because that is what a serious investigator does, and I am a serious investigator. I have spent 3 years learning what I know. I am going to take what I know into the field, and I am going to be careful, and I am going to trust the knowledge and come home and write the full report, and you are going to be satisfied with it. This note is a precaution. Keep the dossier if I do not come back. Make sure it is read by the right person. The right person will know how to find the right people after that, And the right people will be the ones who know about the towers and who keep teaching the children before they teach them anything else. The dossier is the record. The record needs to be kept. And then she has written at the bottom of the cover note, without paragraph break, continuing from the official address to the society and to Forsyth in the same breath. And if the record is being read by someone who intends to go to the border road, please read Mrs. Dunbar's transcript again before you go. Please note what she says about what the cap means. Please note what Hartlaw says about standing still and about the psalm. Please note what the post office woman said about telling the children before anything else, before the school and before the bull. And please understand that you are the children now. Everyone who reads this is the children now, and I am telling you before anything else. If you are going to that road, know what you are going to. Know where the towers are. Know the stretch of 23 miles south from Carter Bar and know the 8 towers and stay away from the 8th one, the one farthest south, the one that still has its roof. Know the smell of iron and what is older than iron, and if you smell it, move carefully. Know the 23rd Psalm. Know it in your body. And do not run. Whatever you do, whatever happens, whatever you see at the window or at the wall or at the edge of the road in the last of the light, do not run. It is very fast for what it looks like, and it has all the time in the world.